The first months of Vespasian's rule would be undertaken by Mucianus and Vespasian's son Domitian, while the emperor remained in Egypt. Mucianus was focused heavily on repairing the empire's slipping finances, and he did so by attempting to impose as many new taxes as the people would allow. Upon Vespasian's arrival in Rome, the taxes continued, in spite of growing rebellions throughout the empire's territories. Persecution of Jews, as Vespasian's son Titus worked to suppress an ongoing revolt in Judea, would add further negativity to the new emperor's early reign, which was then amplified by the Batavian rebellion breaking out in Gaul as Julius Sabinus declared himself emperor of Gaul and a descendant of Julius Caesar. This challenge, too, was eventually thwarted, but Vespasian was becoming increasingly aware of the risk to his power. Something had to be done, and thus was born his propaganda campaign. Immediately upon reaching Rome, the princeps had attempted to win over support by handing out lavish gifts to his soldiers and citizenry. He also ventured to convince the populace that he was their rightful ruler due to his military triumphs thus far. Any remaining supporters of Vitellius or simply opposition to Vespasian were eradicated, and there was an obvious ongoing effort to control the narrative around the emperor's reign. This, nevertheless, wouldn't be enough to save Vespasian from the tradition of conspiracies against the current ruler. Details of these attempts on his life are not well known, but it is noted that the emperor was faced with plot after plot as he struggled to manage public opinion. Achieving success at just that, and thus surviving all schemes targeted against him, Emperor Vespasian would die by illness on June 23, 79 AD, leaving the reins of the empire to Titus. A seasoned military tribune and quaestor, Titus had been made commander of the Praetorian Guard, served as a 7-time consul, and held tribunician power alongside his father during Vespasian's reign. When the time came for someone to take the empty throne after Vespasian's death, Titus was ready for the undertaking. This was in the face of notable concern from the Roman public who, feeding off of prior rumors and accusations, believed that Titus may be more like Caligula or Nero than any of his other predecessors. Their assumptions were quickly challenged, however, as Titus came to power with a promise to put a pause on all treason trials due to his assertion that it is impossible for me to be insulted or abused in any way, for I do naught that deserves censure, and I care not for what is reported falsely. As for the emperors who are dead and gone, they will avenge themselves in case anyone does them a wrong, if in very truth they are demigods and possess any power. Public perception of Titus would gradually shift, and the people's fear melted into relieved approval and even adoration by some. Great feats such as the completion of the Colosseum, which had begun construction under Vespasian, added to Titus's admired accomplishments. Other construction projects may have been overshadowed by a series of ill-fated trials, from the eruption of Mount Vesuvius to a fire in 80 AD that resembled a more tamed rerun of the Great Fire during Nero's reign. Rebellions additionally had to be dealt with under Titus's administration, and allegedly, Domitian began to hatch a scheme against his own brother at some point during his reign. It wouldn't be a conspiracy or imperial challenge that would cause for another exchange of power, however. Just as his father had, Titus would die of disease, in this case, only 2 years into his reign. Some historians compellingly debate this version, however, and posit that Domitian had poisoned his brother, and that Titus's final words, "I have made but one mistake," referenced his refusal to take his wily relative out while he still had the chance. Domitian, having been the obvious second fiddle to his elder brother through their father's reign, was nevertheless an experienced politician as well. And while some historians question if the accusations of his plot against Titus are true, it's evident that the brothers, who'd spent little time together during childhood, were far from close. As Titus lay suffering on his deathbed, Domitian was meeting with the Praetorian camp and ensuring his position as his brother's heir. With Titus's final breath, Domitian was made emperor. The Senate may have quickly come to regret its decision to give Titus's younger brother such unchecked power, because he quickly made that of the Senate severely crippled. Domitian was not shy about his disdain for the entire body of the Senate and the idea that Rome should even resemble the republic it once was. And now he had the authority to do something about those ideas. The new ruler believed that it was his sole duty to guide the Roman government and citizenry down the path to greatness, and thus made it his responsibility to oversee all parts of his administration. If the historian Suetonius is to be believed, the empire ran more smoothly than ever under Domitian, maybe due to the empire's high level of suspicion and willingness to rid himself of anyone he saw as dishonest or untrustworthy. The level of corruption across the empire significantly dropped during Domitian's reign. Furthermore, Domitian lacked the scandalousness of many of his predecessors. He was no fan of the theater as Nero had been, and his intimate life was far more private than the likes of Caligula. He was, in fact, quite a moral man by many standards, and required his citizens to follow his example, steering away from those acts that he saw as debauching. Much like his father had done, Domitian found himself regularly handing out gifts of money to his people and keeping a conscious eye on his public image. Though he never feared to anger the Senate, he was wise enough to know that the citizenry and armed forces must be kept content in the least, particularly in the case of the latter, because he needed them. Domitian saw military triumphs as subsequently important, and he had one specific target in mind that he hoped to triumph over: the kingdom of Dacia. Viewing Britain with much less of a wanting eye than his predecessor, Domitian opted to withdraw from the Isles and instead march his men into Dacia. Having left his campaign against the kingdom early to go back to Rome and accept his new triumph ceremonies, Domitian made quite an appalling mistake. He had assumed that the Dacians were a lost cause, but they weren't. And when the Romans crossed the Danube thinking that they would be finishing the job, they were routed instead by the kingdom's defenders. What the emperor had assumed would be an easy victory turned into a years-long war, eventually ending in a humiliating agreement for peace with the Dacian king. Nevertheless, Domitian was not entirely without success. In other areas of his reign, he proved to be quite effective. Some finishing touches were added to the Colosseum under his watchful eye, as was the final reconstruction of the Temple of Jupiter, and the completion of the Palace of Domitian on Palatine Hill. He also managed to protect his empire's borders despite being distracted by his own outward ambitions, and was far from a complete failure. But if a Roman emperor began his reign with sanity and poise, according to history, he would likely end it with insanity and tactlessness. And Domitian was not immune to such a fall from grace. As the years of the emperor's reign went on, the number of senseless executions and the level of utter paranoia in Domitian's mind rapidly increased. Conspiracies, too, began to climb in numbers. Although, at the start, the emperor managed to escape certain death and rewarded all those who tried to take him out with a death of their own, on September 18th, 96 AD, his luck ran out. Domitian, who had believed for some time that his death was near and would occur at midday on some unknown date, had just been put at ease by one of his servants who had informed the emperor that it was already the afternoon. This servant had lied, but Domitian had trusted his word and went sedately to his desk to carry out some imperial duties. It was around this time that Stephanus, one of his niece's stewards, entered the room announcing that he had discovered yet another scheme to take down the emperor. Stephanus, cradling a bandaged arm he explains to have injured recently, handed the confused ruler a document with alleged proof of the conspiracy. As Domitian looked over the evidence, Stephanus pulled a dagger from his bandage and stabbed the emperor in the groin. Domitian swiftly jumped on his assailant, and the two men hit the floor in a frantic scuffle. As the men's anguished grunts and shouts rang out through the palatial emperor's chambers, more conspirators rushed into the room to join the deadly brawl. In the end, Domitian would succumb to 8 stab wounds, but Stephanus would join him in death, as Domitian had given him one mighty and fatal stab wound of his own. The people of Rome had mixed reactions to yet another assassination. The Senate was ecstatic and hid no such emotion. Much of the army was furious. The Flavian Dynasty had ended. Thus was ushered in a new era for the Roman Empire.